Good evening and welcome to part 2 of my interview with Dave Robbins. He is an author, historian, and man, quite a human being. He wrote a story about what happened on January 6th, 2021. His story says, this could happen to us. We came close. Much closer than Americans realize. Where were you January 6, 2021? Do you remember the horror? Do you remember the fear? Do you remember being confused, angered? America witnessed a spectacle we had never seen before. Usually in our system, we have elections, the winner wins and the loser goes home. We had never seen an attack on one of the sacred pillars of our government, the U.S. Capitol. We saw a mob intent on killing the vice president and the Speaker of the House and anybody else who disagreed with them, including law enforcement officers. Mr. Robbins' book makes us think about what could happen if that had succeeded. He's a historian, as I said, and we're going to talk about 2028, his book, right now. Welcome, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here.
Talk about your dyslexia. In the part 1, we talked about that. You wanted to say something else. Please, go right ahead.
For those that, I know how helpless one can feel when they're dyslexic. It's just, and writing, I would emphasize, just try to write something down. Write the first word, write the first sentence, write the first paragraph, write the first chapter, write the second chapter, write the third. It flows, because basically what it is, it sort of is a way to organize your thinking and your mind. And that's, it puts everything in order. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that. As far as the history, I write history novels, historical novels.
Would you explain to the audience what a historical novel is?
Well, actually, a historical novel now is anything that happened before 50 years ago, which I guess they're all historic, a bona fide historical novel.
Yes.
And they're based on facts and research, and the way that sort of these research, and the facts and the things that happen can be molded to, the development of the characters in the book. The first series I wrote 3 books about the 60s. The first one, The Two-Tone DeSoto, takes place during the Kennedy years, 60 to 63. And the second one takes place in New York City. It's kind of a mystery thing, but all these novels involve the same characters in the first book. And the last one is about Vietnam, where basically it's about a photojournalist who becomes a photojournalist during the Vietnam era, and he's in Vietnam in 1967 to 69. And so that was really, I loved writing that one. I mean, I think but that required a lot of research. However, the reason I'm saying all this is that I found that events in history happen in cycles, every generation. I guess in the 20s we had the Jazz Age, which was a cultural revolution.
Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah, Harlem Renaissance. The whole thing it's basically where people started to, break away from
the norm.
From the Victorian age, if you will.
Yes, absolutely.
And jump into the 40s, we had Pearl Harbor. That was one defining moment. We went to war after that. I would say in the 60s, it was Kennedy assassination. What that did was we young people back then put a lot of faith in our president, because he was young too. And when he was assassinated, we felt violated. And when we felt violated, we reacted. And at the same time, the war was starting to happen in Vietnam. We were kind of making it happen from the U.S. And basically, that's where I think the rift in the society began between the older and the younger generation, and basically the protesters and the people that didn't protest and wanted to go to war because they wanted to, fight for the country to keep the domino theory from happening in communism. But there are those too in Vietnam that went there because they were sort of dragged there. They didn't want to be there. And these are the people that, I lost a few friends in Vietnam. So it was an epic, it was of interest. So the Kennedy assassination, what that did was separate the youth from the generation before and gave them a voice. Now, in the 80s, in my opinion, the one thing that happened was CNN, the 24/7 news cycle, which we're experiencing today. It got people hooked on the news, everything that happened. Before that, we had Walter Cronkite, who'd come on at the 6 o'clock news hour, and
that's the way it is.
Yeah, that's the way it is. And we loved Uncle Walter because what he said meant something. But after that, it developed into a 24-hour cycle, and then with other networks coming on 24-hour news cycle, it became competitive. And who had the best story? If it bleeds, it leads, that type of thing. So that happened in 1984. The same time that it happened in 1984 was a development in, of course, I'm a the Macintosh computer, which basically what that did was it introduced computer to real people, before it was all distant. But what that was is now that computers were more user-friendly, the internet started to be written and developed. And that's another thing to come out of the 80s. So that's the 80s. 2001, we know what happened there, the World Trade Center. That was definitely something that molded our attitude. It woke us up, if you will. And it basically, for a while, brought us together. The tragedy brought us together, and we all had one thing in mind. Until we get to 2020, 2016 more precisely. Nobody in my world, in my realm, expected Donald Trump to win. I grew up in New York. I grew up when Trump was building casinos in Atlantic City and that kind of, and they all flopped, He was kind of a joke, really. But what happened was this developed into this behemoth that kind of, again, molded a culture to his own liking. So what happened was before we had Barack Obama. And I remember being, what a great, it was happy back then. I enjoyed it. I got things done. And it was a great environment. It was the America that I want to remember. And what happened was that changed very suddenly. So it led to the other defining factor in that time, which would be January 6th. It was a time when basically the supporters of a particular individual who didn't think he won the election stormed the Capitol, as Jim was saying earlier. It gave us a sense of hopelessness, a real sense of hopelessness. And it really showed the difference between the angry mob, this way of being and our way of being. It separated, the culture. It rifted it much more than the 60s ever did. And what we're living through now is that kind of rift. And 2028, the reason I mentioned 2020 before is that's when I actually started writing 2028. I worked on most of it just prior to COVID, I think. It's funny it's not funny, but the way this has come true. In my book, the revolution succeeded, and Alexander Kenton became the president, or more like the premier. And he immediately established an autocracy and then a dictatorship. And the book is about what life will be like in 2028 if this were to happen. And it's funny, but in the first part of the book, and this is before I knew anything about what was going on now, he was defeated in his presidential run in 2020 by a woman of color who he later had arrested once he got in. But the thing is, the idea is that, these things are starting to come true. There are gulags in the book. Well, they're already talking about developing, internment camps for where are they going to send all these millions of immigrants? They're not going to go back home. They're going to be put possibly in camps. So that's in the book. There's a sort of like the brown shirts in Nazi Germany. He has the blue shirts, which are his own little private army that go around and basically keep tabs on things. They're the cultural, morality police, if you will, but they could use force if they wanted to. And they worked for something more like the Gestapo, which were the Price people. And basically Price was the preservation and, oh God, what was it? Well, anyway, it was about keeping the preservation of society going. I forget what PRICE stands for already. But at any rate, they were the ones. They were like, if you will call it, sort of like the Gestapo. But the book centers around a guy named Alexander Kenton, his sort of chief of staff. He is running the show from his office in Trump Tower or Kenton Tower on Fifth Avenue in New York. And he has two sycophants that really cling to him. One is named you might call him consigliere, his legal, at that time, just don't forget this is 2020, was named Gugliani. His other person, the sycophant, was, I think it was Stefan Millar. Okay, now you put the two together. And he was basically the cultural minister of keeping the culture clean. Basically that we had no immigrants. We had no one of color. We had no one who wasn't like them. And they made sure that happened. In my book, the first thing that happened is they arrested the intellectuals and Democrats, if you will, and sent them to gulags throughout the country. And so the other person in the book is Sylvia Morales. And Sylvia Morales is a professor who was sent to a gulag. She was a professor of philosophy, I believe, at Yale, and she managed to escape. And she came back to Yale, and they started a counter movement based on democracy, trying to bring it back, explaining that, this was what this country was founded on, not what we're seeing now. So the book is sort of like a whole, like, if you will, sort of a battle between, them and the administration. And so what happens is this Kenton, who I was going to name Trent, he was pretty well relaxed in his position. So his guard was down, but he had one thing in mind toward the end of the book. What he wanted to do is establish a relationship with the premier of Russia to develop a world Soviet republic. And that was his goal in the book. So if you want to read the book and see what happened, that's fine. This is not an ad for it. But the thing is that, there are so many similarities before these things even happen. When I saw them, and I'm saying, oh my God, is the end of this book how it's going to turn out? We have an election coming up. We have threats of violence in the election. We have all the people in place. Jim, I talked to you a few days ago. Even since then, these threats have escalated, they've elevated. They're trying to make people afraid to vote. By all means, vote. And I think that what's going to happen is hopefully the right person will win. Better yet, in a landslide, because if it's close, we're going to see this. We have a chance of seeing this all over again. And I wouldn't rule out, and they've already talked about another January 6th, but this time even more aggressive. So,
how close did we actually come to a takeover of the government?
I would say hair's breadth. You know, had they just made that turn, you know, Pence went this way, and I remember the cop was keeping them on the stairs. What he did was, you know, he was shielding them from Pence. He led them, you know, to another side, and they didn't get to Pence. If they had gotten to Pence and did what they said they wanted to do, was hang him, then it would have been a bloodbath. There are so many narrow escapes that day, and yet, when it all came down to it, the principles of this country held. You know, they did do the due process of, you know, electing a president, what have you. It isn't as bad as, you know, as shaky as it was, but and the inauguration went forward. But we came within a hair's breadth, and had Congress not gone back that night and really worked hard through the night to do that, to establish, you know, what they were sent there to do that day is to, you know, certify the president.
Yes,
they did. But if they hadn't, if they said, well, wait a minute, we're still hung up on this thing, we got to go home and rest, you know, then it would have happened again. It would have continued. So all of the pieces seem to vaguely fit together until they fit together to what we have now. We're still on shaky ground. And I still hate to say this, but it could happen again. And it still could happen. But I think, you know, at the end of the day, the irony is that as individuals, we vote, we are the best line of defense against this happening. And so we just need to vote. The power lies with us, not with them, not with him. The power lies with the people. And that's what the Constitution says. I heard this morning he wants to shred the Constitution. What it says is it's we the people. We are the people. He works for us. They work for us. We don't work for them. And we don't do their bidding. So anyway, I'm going off on this thing. But
no, you're fine.
But the point is that the danger is that, you know, I never imagined that 2028 would happen. When I was writing it, I said, it's ridiculous, you know. It's a fun book. It's political speculation, you know, but it's happening. And I think that we just have to be very aware of that. And, you know, we, as I say, we are the strongest line of defense against that happening, we the people. So the election is 3 weeks from today. It's going to be a long process, guaranteed. They're going to take forever to count the votes. But I remember when Nixon and Kennedy won, but Nixon, they came very close. They had to count votes by hand. They were hand ballots.
112,000 Kennedy won by.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, it's exactly it. And they counted everyone by hand. It took 3 weeks to come up with the full, you know, the results of that election. I hope that we don't have to go through that again this time, because the stress, America is really undergoing, the people of America are undergoing just a high degree of stress.
What will it take to bridge that gulf and bring us together? What elements must conspire to make that happen?
Well, I think what we have to do is just, to me, it's self-evident that Trump loses, that he doesn't get in, okay? If he does, it's going to be very difficult to hang on to democracy. We have to work as one. We have to develop a bridge in this rift that has developed. And it is a big, wide, solid rift. And we in Connecticut, you know, I love living in Connecticut because I feel safe here. But if anybody's ever been to Western Pennsylvania, they can get a good shot at what the rest of the country, much of the rest of the country is about, which is why when you see a map, there's so much red on it now. Not the blue is in each of the coasts, but
there were incidences in our history where people did extraordinary things because they thought about the country. And you mentioned Mr. Nixon. There were those people telling him in 1960 that he had won. And he just decided that for the good of the country, he would concede. And he conceded to John Kennedy. Then you had Al Gore, who said, look, okay, for the good of the nation, I'm going to just concede and move this forward, move on down the road with this. And those incidences of people in a position of authority thinking about the nation and not themselves.
That's a good point.
That has to happen.
This all rests with one person who doesn't want to go to court and get sent to jail, what very could happen if he loses. So the thing is that we can't become subservient to one individual because that individual doesn't seem to, we don't think his way. We have to all that's how dictatorships are born. Trump, I think, is kind of eyeing something like Hungary right now.
Though, David, they almost always fail.
Yeah.
In final analysis.
Yeah.
The damage done, well, that's a different story. But they almost always fail.
The one thing that really scares me is if Trump gets in office and he's old, as we all know, something could happen to him. Who becomes president? Vance. And he's younger. He's dangerous. And they're already setting up, where Stephen Miller might be the justice, the attorney general. We don't want that. But at any rate, I think that this is going to be a crucial election. And you say, what can we do to resolve this? Vote. And
so that's your advice to...
And vote well. And don't worry, it's going to happen.
Don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid, because this could just fade away, hopefully, like all the other stuff has faded away in history. Unfortunately, the stakes are high this time.
So the price of freedom is eternal vigilance.
Eternal vigilance, yeah.
You can't take your foot off the pedal.
Exactly, and thank you for saying that, because really it's about being an American. Not necessarily a patriot. It's about being an American.
When I joined the military, there were people who told me I was crazy. People, African Americans, this country's done nothing for you. They hate you because you're black, and they're not going to do anything for you. Why would you put a uniform on and risk your life for this racist country? And my reply was then and is now, it's because the whole country isn't racist. Because it's my country. Because I can see beyond where you're looking, and I understand the importance of thinking about my country first. There were a million reasons why I could have said, screw this, I'm out of here. But I didn't. I volunteered. That's what has to happen now.
Yeah.
We got to step up for the country.
The country belongs to us. We deserve it. But what we don't deserve is the kind of thing that could happen in lieu of that. We cannot, because if the wrong person gets in there, we're going to end up having to be, subservient. And we are not subservient nation.
No.
And we are not subservient people. We believe in the forces that found this country.
Right.
And,
So in the final analysis, vote.
Vote, 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 vote.
Folks, my guest has been David Robbins. He's written a book called 2028. It talks about the success of a coup to overthrow the U.S. government. It can happen here. Don't let it happen on your watch. My name is James Ransom Reed Jr. I'm the host of What's Your Story? Everybody has a story. What's yours? Until next time, good night.
Nick Augustino right here at the East Side Restaurant. We always have the complete full dinner menu. Knockwurst, bratwurst, sauerbraten, potato pancakes, red cabbage, rice pudding, cream pies, all the desserts that Germany had to offer. I always do something different. Yes, I do. I brought seafood to the beer garden at the East Side Restaurant. East Side Restaurant, your German destination restaurant in Connecticut. Tiki-taka, tiki-taka, hi, hi, hi!
Like us on Facebook. Search Nutmeg TV.